can't be done as possible. It looks like there is some other structures in the area, going to one side, be in conflict with the driveway. Seems perfectly normal to me for the addition structure as proposed. Does everybody agree with that? C, will the requested area variance be substantial? It's 3 feet. I don't think that's substantial by any means. Everybody in agreement? D, will the proposed area variance have an adverse or impact on any physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood or district? I can't imagine that it would. Does everybody concur? E, is the alleged difficulty self-created, which is a consideration that shall be relevant to the discussion of the Board of Appeals, but shall not necessarily preclude the granting of the area variance. Aside from not expanding on your household, which I believe is a right that everybody should have, I would say the answer to that is no. Everybody agree?
Yeah.
F, is the variance the minimum necessary? I believe that it is, yeah. Do we want to impose any conditions or restrictions on this? I don't see the need to.
No.
Okay.
I move that we grant the variance as submitted.
I will second that. I'll second. All in favor? Aye. Your variance has been granted.
You'll be getting a
Great.
letter, you get a letter from me, the planning board gets it, and also town clerk,
Okay.
and the building department.
All right, thank you very much.
Very well. Have a good evening.
You too.
Oh,
Thank you.
Okay, so we have our second public hearing scheduled for 7:10. It is for Eric and Moore Hurleyman. Fantastic last name. They are requesting to construct a residential accessory use workshop shed. They're looking for a side yard area variance of 20 feet from the required 25-foot side yard setback. And I would like to remind everybody that if this was a structure or shed of 144 square feet or less, it would completely meet our current zoning code. It's only because it's larger than that he is here to request the variance. That being said, I would like to move that we open the public hearing.
I'll second that.
All in favor? Mr. Hurleyman, you're
Yes.
welcome to address us again regarding your structure.
Yeah, I'd like to have a work shed. I don't really have too many other areas where I can put this. I searched actually on my property, but it's with all the slopes and we have a Verizon box and where the septic runs, and it's a triangular property, as you probably saw. So
Yes. I've driven past the lot several times. It's very noticeable from the road. I like that you're doing that.
Yeah, thank you.
Kind of bringing the church back. But yes, it is an extremely odd shaped
Mhm.
piece of property, and I am aware of the incline towards the rear of the property, which can make it kind of tough
Mm.
for placements.
Right.
And it does seem that there's a lot going on in other areas, leach fields, septic tanks, wells, electric pedestals and hubs. There's all kinds of stuff going on there. So you're very limited on where you may be able to place any shed. Did we receive any correspondence on this matter? Is there anybody else in the public this evening that's here to speak on this matter?
The post office is next door.
Mhm.
There's a lot of woods and brush in between.
Yeah. Yeah. And about a 6-foot slope. So we're like about 6 feet higher than the post office.
No flood risk.
Hmm?
No flood risk.
No what?
No flood risk.
Right, very low, very low. Thank goodness.
Does anybody have any further questions for him? Okay. I move that we close the public hearing, unless anybody else has anything they'd like to speak on.
he wouldn't have had to come before us. How much smaller would it have been than what's proposed?
Well, I believe it was, if I can remember properly, 10 by 12 or 10 by 14 is where we made the 144 square foot determination, just roughly without doing the math. 12 by 12, okay. So it would have had to been roughly a 12 by 12 shed or 10 by 14 shed.
And
depending.
this is how much?
20 by
20 by
12.
12,
So,
240 square feet.
Mhm.
Excuse me. Yep, 240.
To cut an 8-foot board on a table saw, I need at least 16 feet. That's really dangerous to just end it at 16 feet. So if he's gonna cut anything of value for building, he's really gonna need at least 20 feet. And that's still pretty, he should do 24 by 14, if he's gonna be safe.
do I have a second for closing the public hearing? All in favor? Aye. Do you have a second for that?
I put Len as a second. It's his turn.
Let's review the criteria for approving this variance. A, will an undesirable change be produced in the character of the neighborhood or detriment to nearby properties be created by the grant of this area variance? He's got a lot of woods around him, and the character of the neighborhood I don't see being changed at all by this structure. Does everybody agree? Okay. B, will the benefit sought by the applicant be achieved by some method feasible for the applicant to pursue other than a variance? Reviewing the property and seeing everything that's going on there, I think he's picked a relatively good spot for this. I don't think he has many other options with the lay of his land. So I don't see that if he wants a work shed, this is probably the best place for it. Everybody agree? C, will the requested area variance be substantial? Again, if this was a shed of slightly smaller square footage, wouldn't even be before us this evening, so I don't consider it substantial by any means. Does everybody agree with that? D, will the proposed variance have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions of the neighborhood? No flood risk, I believe was the,
Streams on the other side of the post office.
and you won't be dumping toxic chemicals or any kind of,
No.
you know, stuff in there. Doesn't seem like.
No,
Okay.
that would be my nature.
E, is the alleged difficulty self-created, which consideration shall be relevant to the discussion of the Board of Appeals, but now shall not necessarily preclude the granting of the area variance. And again, a lot of people want sheds these days. We all overflow out of our house. We're all product of the 21st century and have a lot of stuff. So sheds are important, in my opinion. I don't see how this is necessarily self-created. Everybody agree with that? F, is the variance the minimum necessary? And again, this goes back to 5 feet is the accepted standard for any other size shed. It's what he's seeking. He's keeping in terms with the code. Everybody agree? And do we want to impose any restrictions or considerations on, conditions on this? I don't see the need to. So I will make a motion that we accept the variance as stated.
You're gonna grant, right? You're gonna
Grant the variance, yeah, thank you.
Okay.
All in favor?
Mitch?
Okay. Variance has been granted. Enjoy your shed/workshop.
You'll be getting a letter, so are your neighbors.
Okay.
Not your neighbors, just you and the planning board,
Mhm.
building inspector, and town clerk.
Okay, thank you very much.
Very welcome. Have a good evening.
You too.
Okay. Next, so we had the two variance applications. We addressed number one, but we're gonna speak with you guys after so we can make sure we get everything ironed out perfectly. The second application is for a use variance. And this is from a Mr. Christopher Yo. Welcome. And this is regarding the St. Joseph's Church on Zandhook Road in Hurley, or Hurley Heights, as I like to refer to it. He is looking for a use variance to convert the existing church, which is located in an R2 district, into a print shop facility. Okay. This is not allowed in the R2 district, and as the board knows, use variances are a whole another beast as far as area variances are concerned. There's different stipulations. So at this point, I would like to allow you to address the board and just speak to us on concerns, what you plan to do with it.
So I would like to ask my attorney, Mr. Tom Benton, to speak on my behalf.
Certainly. I believe we've seen Tom before.
Yes, I was going to say, it's
Yeah.
nice to see all these familiar faces and some new ones as well.
Welcome back.
Thank you, nice to be here. Mr. Yu wrote a very elaborate presentation, but asked if I would present it because I'm more
Certainly.
comfortable to
Yep.
stand up and
By all means.
talk. It's okay if I
Yep.
present this. This is a survey map of the premises. And these materials are all related to the presentation. Mr. Yu presently operates a printing shop in the town of Ulster, in the building that is the former Tech City site. For various reasons, that's become less
I know
less
those issues.
attractive.
Yes.
Won't go into the reasons why. And so Mr. Yu has been looking for another place to operate his very successful printing business. Just for the board's information, its success is tied to the fact that he produces print products on thicker paper than just paper, and hence the name Thicket, which is the name of the company. He's been negotiating to purchase this just under 11.5 acre parcel, which formerly was the Catholic Church off Zandhook Road. Its address is 185 Zandhook Road. And it's mostly vacant land with a driveway which leads in directly from Zandhook all the way to the church, which is what I would say the rear of the property.
Two driveways.
There are two
One
driveways.
access off the common.
The main properties that would have visual contact with any activity are both located beyond the property on the other side from Zandhook Road, and it's important for the board to understand that there would be no activity on that side of the building whatsoever, since the entry is through the opposite side. The traffic impact of the anticipated change would be small. The exact details are in the presentation there, but Mr. Yu anticipates that the daily traffic count would be increased by 12 to 14 vehicles. Given the current traffic data for Zandhook Road, that would be less than a 1% increase in the traffic. And significantly, all of that traffic would be from Zandhook Road, which is a somewhat busier roadway than if this were an internal residential road. Mr. Yu receives deliveries of paper products by truck, 4 to 6 deliveries per month, so that's a fairly small intrusion in terms of that kind of traffic. He gets no traffic from any retail customers. All of his marketing is done through online, from online facilities, and not too many visitors to his facility. I guess I've been one of the more many visitors lately because of this project. The noise generated by the printing equipment is contained inside the building. And the noise outside the building wouldn't be significantly different from normal residential home use with mowing and AC and that sort of thing. I think that's the main part of it. Mr. Yu observes that he runs a very clean operation using mainly modern digital printing equipment, and I'll personally attest to that. I visited him at his facility, and it is beautifully, impeccably clean and well maintained. Militating, I think, perhaps from the town's perspective in favor of this use variance is that the property is vacant, and I guess has been for a while. It's not being used for anything. Also, being the property of a religious organization, it's also not on the tax rolls. So for whatever significance that may have, this would change that. And it would also mean that there would be a presence in a building which is presently empty, which I think in most cases is an unattractive situation for any community to have, vacant buildings. The other aspect that I want you to be aware of is that the changes to the building are virtually all inside, interior, and they're very minimal. It happens to be that the way the building is set up is very compatible with what Mr. Yu needs to conduct his business. And he did include floor plan drawings of what small changes he would be looking to make. I think that's all I have to give you as a presentation, but I invite you to ask any questions you may have at this point.
Does he own the building now?
He does not. We're in the process of getting a contract from the church. The church did write a letter of authorization to permit Mr. Yu to make this application on their behalf, is the way I would put it, because from their standpoint, it's also very desirable to have this building.
So the church is the applicant, not the gentleman?
Well,
No, the church is the owner. He is the
church is the owner, yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
I think they're allowing him to grant it because, if he can't receive the variance, then he probably does not have interest in
That's correct,
purchasing
yes.
property. So it's an important step along the way.
It's a condition of the sale, actually,
Um,
and if I can ask this question, I'm also interested
Well, look
to,
at this. We can hand it to you.
yeah, let me have it.
I do have some concerns from the community standpoint regarding this. I'm relatively familiar with the property. I know it's where the town stages their Memorial Day parades and whatnot. And my main concern would be that residential does encompass the entire
Mhm.
lot. And it is a substantially sized lot. And attaching, first off, to grant a use variance in a property like that, surrounded by that much residential, has a lot of implications on our side to change that over. And being that the property is the size that it is, allowing commercial use or printing shop there would encompass the entire property itself. So it wouldn't, without any restrictions placed or anything, it opens up the entire property
Mhm.
to commercial purposes.
Mhm.
Not just, and I know preemptively, running and making just small changes there stands, but and if the variance was accepted or granted, there wouldn't be really too much holding back from much more happening around the premise.
Although I presume that would
Moving
require a
in the
new
future.
application, wouldn't it, to
Construct that.
construct new buildings or?
I'm making an assumption here, it would have to go under site review plan,
Mhm.
most likely, and all those various things, but that would just be, on my side, speaking from the community standpoint, the residents that are all around it.
Mhm.
These would all be large concerns for them.
Cutting in the other direction, it's also a concern for Mr. Yu because the purchase price for this property is pretty hefty.
Certainly.
And
But I think anybody familiar with the property knows the value that's probably attached to that property.
Well, as building lots, probably not what we're talking about here. As commercial, potentially commercial sites, maybe. Mr. Yu has no plans to do anything other than occupy the building and use it to conduct his business for the immediate future, but of course, you know, there will inevitably come a time when the property will, you know, be sold to another owner.
Certainly.
And I think the concerns that you're expressing are
That
very
would be,
legitimate.
and that's,
Yeah.
you know, I'm not, I'm trying to play kind of devil's advocate
I
here and
totally-
just
I totally get it.
putting the things out there before,
Yep.
you know, any kind of, anybody comes, you know,
Mhm.
from public and whatnot. I've been on the board long enough to know, I haven't been on the board very long, but to know that anytime there's use variance considered, especially within a heavy residential area, there's gonna be a lot of pushback and there's a lot to consider here.
Mhm.
And they're very tough to pass, you know, it comes with a different set of criteria than the area variance and they're hard to obtain. So, I'm just trying, as I said, you know.
Actually, I am familiar with it. I've had some prior experiences with the town of Woodstock and, you know, similar applications. Maybe not quite as much land as this
Yeah.
is, but, so anyway, I do understand the concerns. If it would be helpful, I don't know if this is your policy even for me to suggest this, but if it would be helpful for me or myself and Mr. Yu to sit down with the board or members of the board to talk about what might be considered to make it less worrisome.
Sure.
I'd certainly be delighted to do that. Just so you're aware, the purchase is contingent on being able to
Yeah.
use the building for what, you know,
Mhm.
what he needs to use it for. So it's critical that that be part of it.
Yeah.
And, you know, what he would hope for and we would hope for is that the other militating factors might weigh in the balance in favor of what, you know, is a substantial change. I certainly understand that.
Yeah. And as you state, it hasn't necessarily been, I don't believe, completely abandoned. Obviously, I think they ran like a soup kitchen or maybe a kind of charity type of scenario out of there, but it may have only been like on a Tuesday. But I know that a lot of the residents that border it are used to like nothing happening in there. So obviously, everybody would be receiving a letter about this,
Mhm.
and it's really, you know, being that it's 360 degrees of residential, I see a lot of pushback possibly coming on this.
Mhm.
So,
Well, we would
and we
hope,
kind of are under a microscope with use
Yeah.
variances. You know, we have to cross Ts, dot Is, address everybody, and we have to speak on behalf of, you know, the public. So
Sure.
I'm not saying it certainly can't happen, but it's going to be you know, a lot to address.
okay, well, we're
on this
ready
matter.
to do that. And,
Okay.
I don't live in the town of Hurley, so it's gratuitous for me to say this, but, or actually, maybe I do. I'm at Maverick Knolls. Maybe, I think I'm
It's
right
in
on the
Hurley.
very edge of it, now that I think of it. But anyway, it
You
seems to
live
me
in the
that,
town of Hurley then?
yeah, it seems to me that I'm right on the border there. On balance, there are reasons why this would be a value add, and if the other concerns can be adequately addressed, that's what we'd like to try to work to achieve, so.
Josh, am I correct? The use variance goes with the land and not with the party buying it?
That's correct.
Yeah. So this is something that would be
Therefore,
attached.
going in the future,
And
if
that's
they
when
were
it-
to
yeah.
get rid of it, then whomever buys it
Could use it
is
for-
not beholden by anything we can put against Mr. Yu.
Unless that was what the variance
Yeah,
terms.
unless we have a restriction.
Well,
on
that's
every
where,
resident
you know,
who has a current building.
I'm going to use the word if the variation is granted, it would, I'm sure it would carry restrictions
Yeah.
on it.
Let them stage the parade, just use the one building.
You might be interested to know that if the sale were to go through, it would also have restrictions imposed upon it that are a requirement of the church, because they have their own precepts about what covenants should run with the land, and so we'll have some of those already on top of.
No beer?
No beer, yeah. That's one of them. Yeah.
Can't do a brewery.
No rock
I have a
concerts here.
No,
Oh,
Yes.
anyway. Yes.
Question. So this was, this is a church, and you're looking, the purchaser is looking to make it into a business, commercial. So, having said that, is there a more restrictive, more stringent requirement for septic and/or sewer?
I think
It would
electrical,
probably be less.
because there's not a whole
Because the
congregation
church-
in there at one time,
The church with the congregation and the classrooms and the kitchen that are in there would probably be more of a tax on septic water use
I would think, is
than
Yes.
a printing
is
business.
he planning on upgrading the electrical systems for printing?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Okay, but, that's gonna have to be considered in terms of the impact on, probably negligible, but that's a
Okay.
thing.
It's all being,
Yeah.
it would be handled through Central Hudson, and it would be
Yeah,
an upgraded
Minor.
service.
yeah.
Just so you're aware, Mr. Yu has, I believe, 10 to 13 employees?
9.
No, I'm sorry, 9 employees. So if that gives you an idea about septic impact,
It's
plenty of
a
homes.
little different, but not, probably less, like Glenn said, because it's not 100 people at a time, it's
Right.
9 every day.
And I believe a couple of them are part-time, so.
How many shifts a day is it? Is it one shift or 3 shifts?
I believe
Just
you're,
the one shift.
One shift.
What size are the trucks, by the way?
they're FedEx trucks.
Okay. Yeah.
No 18 wheelers, just a regular moving truck.
Hey, don't limit yourself. Maybe it'll get to that.
You operate 5 days a week, 7 days a week?
5 days.
5 days a
Yeah,
week,
Monday to
regular
Friday.
Monday through Friday?
7 to 3.
Okay. And Glenn?
I was gonna ask him if he's got a job opening.
Does this, I know he's not, the changes to the structure that he's proposing are just basically the same, adding garage, new windows, things like that. Would he have to go through any site review, being that,
Oh, yeah,
That'd be
yeah, if
commercial
he
and
gets
everything.
if he's granted the variance, then he'll have to go to probably special use permit.
It'll certainly involve a building.
Well,
Building
we'll have to
permit.
go for special use permit. Because I'm sure that if I look at it, with the printing shops have to be probably special use permit granted.
yeah, I don't know, I worked in printing for a little bit, but I assume that you have excess, like various inks and solvents and whatnot that have to be disposed of.
Those are all days.
Those are all days?
It's
all digital.
I am a little
Digital
dated.
printing.
I'm sorry, it's a lot cleaner and more self-contained, nothing to throw out.
Laser
Okay.
set.
It's all
Yeah.
digital.
They have a burn barrel.
I used to make myself blind and double printing
Yeah,
days.
they just burn it all.
Burn my nostrils out. Well, I've said my concerns on this, and although I see this being, a lot of red tape wrapped around this, I'm not against sending it to a public hearing to hear what the public has to say. Everybody adjoining the property is going to receive notice, and there are quite a few partials. If it's across the street, it doesn't get a letter, right?
When Sandhook Road.
Yeah, but this is, I'm assuming everybody in the entire neighborhood's gonna hear about this.
And I think
One way or
Sandhook Road, Glenn, I would have to put that to Ulster County Planning, right? Because the
Oh,
Sandhook
yeah,
Road,
this absolutely has to go.
so it would go to
go
Ulster County Planning Board as well.
Okay.
Yeah, it has to be referred to county planning.
How many residents are we talking about roughly, you know?
I know on the one side where it's closest to the building, there's probably at least 3 residents,
And the same on Sandhook maybe, and then.
And then there's everybody on
Conifer.
Sunset Terrace. I don't
About
know
probably
if
12.
people on Conifer, you know, are probably gonna hear about.
Well,
I could see more, but like I said, I can see easily a lot more than just the adjoining property owners kind of
I'm very,
being concerned about this.
I'm very well aware that you don't have to be a contiguous
Next meeting, right?
property.
Yeah,
owner
you
to
know,
come and
that
voice your
they're
opinion.
they're gonna get the
Sure.
letters,
Yeah.
but the word is gonna spread like
Sure,
wildfire.
no,
fire.
I would expect a big turnout for that.
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to, you know, present the idea that if there's any pre-planning that can be at least discussed so that we know how to answer concerns, that would be helpful.
Any meeting like that would have to be open to the public, though.
You've got a month,
Okay.
you've got a month to throw in
Yeah, I would
barbecue and invite
almost
everybody and
imagine
explain
that it, you know, should we send it to public hearing for the next meeting? I can't see us necessarily being able to reach a conclusion at that meeting just because of the number of concerns that we may have to field from it, you know, so.
Mhm.
Does anybody have any other thoughts?
You
I'd
have,
just say,
you have
as,
62
you know,
days from the day of the meeting to vote on it.
If
From
you
the public
feel like,
hearing,
From the
if you
public
feel like
hearing.
being very
From the
friendly,
close of the
go
public
meet
hearing.
people
Yeah.
and talk to them.
From the close
and
of the
explain
public
yourselves. You
hearing.
guys have a good explanation.
62
You have a
days.
That
nice,
doesn't mean you have to
you're doing
close
a
the
nice
public
thing.
hearing at the
Yeah.
next meeting.
The
Okay.
more you can communicate, the less people will feel surprised,
Mhm.
and the easier the
Thank
process
you, I think
will
that's a
be.
good suggestion. Maybe we'll
Yeah.
want to
I don't know if the church will
find out
let
who the
you
people are and
barbecue
write a
yet.
letter telling them what we're doing and why we think it's a good thing
Yeah,
for the
Yeah.
town.
because, you know,
Be a community
people can
participant.
be ornery these days, and you know, the
I have
cleaner
no-
and nicer and more open,
I
you know,
have
good
noticed
policies.
that orneriness, but that's because I'm here to deal with
Oh,
it.
no, participate in the community.
Yeah.
Don't make people feel tricked or
Yep,
anything.
yep.
They-
No,
you're halfway there.
Great.
Yeah, but it's a fantastic building, and I do, you know, I'm not 100% against anything, but it's all gonna, you know, we have to follow the laws and regulations that
I understand.
are above us, and being that it's the odd property where it's placed,
Yeah.
you know, to begin with, and it's just, it's gonna be a very tough circumstance to put something commercial in there.
Okay, well, I like the
But
challenge,
let's,
so.
yes, exactly.
That part's fine, and may I also say, it's a great building for Mr. Yu too, because it really is almost in move-in condition in terms of its parameters, its size, its access. I mean, it's really a very suitable building for him, which is why it is worth him going to this much
Sure.
effort to propose it. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
You want to do that public hearing now?
Oh, yeah.
Well, does anybody else have anything to say about this matter, or want to address us before we?
I just have a question.
Sure.
Couldn't there be a stipulation that the rest of the property could not be expanded, the building could not be
That,
expanded?
I think that would be a huge part of the criteria attached to if granting of the area variance happens. Because there is a lot of room for, you know, and that was what I was going back. It's a substantially sized property.
Right.
Encompassed by all residential, and there would be to pass commercial there and then have that go on to somebody else further down. It'd be a nightmare on our.
Potentially, yeah.
Yes, potentially.
May I just add something to that, since you brought that up? I think that that's probably a great idea, and you could create an envelope around the building that would be, you know, as big as you wanted it to be or as small as you wanted it to be, that could be developed, and then leaving the rest as residentially zoned or whatever. But you could certainly do something like that also.
Like a split use,
Well,
Middle grounds.
you could restrict it to the existing building.
exactly.
Yeah.
And parking area.
Right.
So that, you know, there's an adaptive reuse of the building
And
as it
parking area.
currently exists, and the parking area which is there, and not necessarily transfer all that use
Okay.
to the rest of the property.
Right, and this way, 10 years out, he wants to expand the building a little bit. Of course, he's got to go through the building department to do so, but he could
God.
do it within that.
Years.
He could do it
How many
within that
apartments does he
envelope.
want to put in it?
Or create
How many-
another
how many
storage
units is he
building
gonna
or
do?
something like
More than
that,
30?
all within that envelope.
Certainly. And I'm sure those are things we need to be considering.
All he wants to do.
Sure you will, I did myself.
Glenn, did you have anything to add?
No, I have nothing to add, I'm ready to move on.
Well, I move that we send this to public hearing for the August 8th meeting and prepare for use.
Let's get square footage.
What, we're gonna put Mr. Dixon first because he might be in and out,
Well,
but this is
yeah, well-
not going to be.
Yes.
So he's a
correct.
7:05, so
Yeah.
what time do you want, Mr. Young?
7, let's give ourselves 7:15, that way maybe if there's any other applications, we can hopefully maybe get
Yep.
them in and out. Do I have a second to send that to public
Warren?
hearing? All in favor?
And again, it will be just like Glenn says it has to be in your application. And we need a check for $50, you can bring it next month, and it'll be made out to the town clerk, the Pearlie Town Clerk, and that pays for the publishing of the notice in the paper.
See, once we